Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and we just thank you for you and your word. It's so full of rich treasures, and we just thank you for your spirit that guides us through understanding the scriptures. And today we're going to get into Daniel 11, where there's just a lot of intrigue as to how this evil king, despised person, how did he rise in power, as well as just some of the things he did. So God, may you just be with us as we go through this text and just really take in the wonderful truths that are in it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So if you look at the chapter 11, and we'll get into the rest of the chapter 11 up to verse 35 soon. Well, one of the things about this is after verse 35, and you have all this uprising, the empire really starts declining big time. And actually, the nation of Egypt falls to Rome in 63 BC. So this happens around maybe 100 years before that. So Egypt's fall is going to go very rapidly. And at the same time, the Seleucid Empire falls pretty much right after this. So this really kind of culminates in those two empires, as well as the key events of, as we'll see, of the Seleucid Empire comes to, well, what happened to the high priest at Jerusalem. We'll learn about that today. And then with the Maccabean revolt, that pretty much ends the so-called rule of the Seleucid Empire onto Jerusalem, onto Judea. So there's something called the Hasmonean period that takes over as the ruling body for Jerusalem, for the Judea area, after Antiochus IV dies. So this is a big transition, and these are the big events that lead up to that. And so I wrote the key phrases in verses 21 to 24 on the board, because I'll be pointing to just like highlights of what do these phrases mean. And I hope to get a little bit into verses 25 to 28 and a little bit 29 to 30, part A. I'll explain why that break is at the end of the class. So today we're going to look into how did Antiochus seize the kingdom by intrigue? Some of the translations you might have seized by flatteries. What kind of flatteries did he do? And then he deceitfully rose in power. Well, how did he do that? And he got coined the nickname, and some of the Jewish people made fun of him by calling him Antiochus Epimanes instead of Epiphanes. And Epimanes means madman. So was he crazy? And we can actually look at some historical texts as to what were some of the things he did that led them to think that he might be kind of a little bit loose upstairs, okay? And he devises plans against these cities. And then after that, the next section, verses 25 to 28, it talks about Antiochus' rivalry with Egypt. This is where, in this section, Antiochus IV fights against Ptolemy VI, it turns out, and some of his ruling body there. And that's the big fighting in verses 25 to 28. And we'll learn that is the sixth and last Syrian war. That's what that is in verses 25 to 28. And actually it goes all the way to verse 30, part A. So here, we're going to get into Antiochus' fourth rise in power. And this first few slides is a recap of last week, where we looked at verse 21. He's a despised person. He will arise. Royal honors will not be given to him. He wasn't in the line that he should be king. His older brother, Demetrius I, is in jail in Rome. He should be king. He's the son of the second son within the kingdom before him, Antiochus III. So he should not be in the line of being a king. Okay. And he will come during a time of peace and seize the kingdom by intrigue. And then verse 22, sometimes these phrases are so abbreviated it can seem very cryptic or hard to determine what it exactly means. There's a flood of forces that will be swept away before him. So he will defeat this flood of forces. They will be broken, as well as this covenant prince. We'll learn that this covenant prince is the high priest in Jerusalem. And we'll get into the details. I'm just kind of giving you an overview now. And verse 23, Antiochus will make an alliance with this high priest, with him, and he will act deceitfully against him. So he's going to be very deceitful to the high priest. Okay? And Antiochus will be able to rise with a small nation. He has actually a very small group of people or army, but he's able to overcome many other forces. So kind of against big odds. And then verse 24, during a time of peace, or another translation says unexpected time, he will come into the richest parts of the province. So he will move around, go to some richest parts of a province, and he did something that his forefathers never did. What did he do that none of his forefathers ever was able to accomplish or just did that he did? Some of the things he did in the next sentence is he will lavish upon people plunder, loot, and wealth on his followers. He will give away a lot of stuff. Okay? And he will make plans against fortified cities, but only for a time. So this is the bulk of the passage we'll go through today, just trying to unravel and figure out what does all this mean. All right? And we learned last time that the despised person had several other translations. Despicable is one of them. We learn about the royal honors, or the kingship, majesty of kingship was not given to him. He's not along that line. And he seized the kingdom by intrigues or flatteries, treachery, deception. So I mentioned that this serves to introduce this character. The very first verse, and this is typical of Hebrew, usually the introductory verse says the summary and then explains it down the line. Okay, so, and again, I'll send you these slides so you can read these on your own. I'm going to skip through some of the repeat slides. Show that Antiochus IV is not in the royal line. It should have been Demetrius, and he's still in jail when his father Seleucus IV got assassinated. So there was a void as to the kingship. Okay. And we learned that there was a battle for kingship. So Seleucus IV is assassinated. He has this person named Heliodorus, who's like a finance minister, and through trickery, he took control. In fact, he's the one that killed Seleucus IV. And because at the time that Seleucus IV dies, Antiochus IV was very young. So many times in these kingdoms, the advisor of a young king is kind of acting as the king, even though the young king is on paper the king. And so in this case, Demetrius I is in jail, Antiochus is very young, and the other Antiochus IV, which is the brother of Seleucus IV, he got switched, so he's coming home from the Roman jail, and he stops in Athens first. And that was very strategic because he started to talk to some of the people in Rome that were in power. And I mean, in Athens that were in power, and then he ends up influencing a couple of the leaders in Athens to help him to win back the kingship. So that's what's going on. So he's very crafty. He use things to his advantage. And here, as we'll find out, he solicits the king of Pergamum to help him overthrow Heliodorus. On his way home, he finds this out. Heliodorus is in control, so he needs to change that. And one of the things that was really hard with respect to as a historian, as someone that wants to prove beyond the Bible evidence of something happened, is there are pockets of where there's very little information. So in this case, Antiochus, the younger one, is not in some of the various historians' write-ups. So it turns out that, as this historian, Mr. Gura, said, very sparing attention is paid to this young Antiochus because he is kind of a puppet king. Really, Heliodorus is ruling. He's not really doing anything. So anything of accomplishment of significance would not be documented because he's just not relevant. And fortunately, there were coins that were minted at the time. So the first row here is the coins of Seleucus IV, and they did find a couple coins of young Antiochus. And the date of those are in between Seleucus IV and Antiochus IV. That points to that he did exist. He was the kind of the puppet king in between these two. Okay, all right. So from the coins, it is clear that the interval between the murder of Seleucus IV and Antiochus IV took the throne, that there is this child king. Okay. And Heliodorus, he tried to seize the throne. The young Antiochus is there. He's trying to do things, and he's trying to solidify himself as the king. Okay. And when Antiochus IV is coming back from Athens, he sees this and he goes, I got to basically defeat and kick out Heliodorus because he's not the rightful king. Okay. So what does he do? Antiochus IV, he has the help of Eminus and Attalus. These are two king and brother in Pergamum. So what's going on is Antiochus IV is in Athens. He goes to Pergamum, the city. He gets the help of Eminus II, and Attalus is his brother, and they both come down to take over back that area, to basically reclaim the kingdom. So they start coming down. Heliodorus flees, so he's no match for them. And this is a write-up from one of the historians say that Antiochus, the son of Antiochus the Great, that's the third, ascended to the throne. He was called the illustrious one, that's why it's Epiphanes, because the government was seized by the usurpers, shows himself to be the true sovereign. He is the true sovereign king that should be there. So they gave him that label. And then there's this artifact, a Athenian inscription, OGIS 248, and the inscription really just supports this action. Okay, so this is what it says in the inscription in this third bullet, that Seleucus IV passed away. Antiochus IV up to the border of his kingdom, having supported him with money and supply forces, adorned him with a diadem, other accoutrements, and so forth. And basically, the kings of Pergamum say it is right that we should help to restore the king Antiochus to his ancestral rule. That is the right thing to do. So these two kings, king and brother of Pergamum, helps Antiochus IV to go back to the Seleucia land and say, you're the rightful king, we're going to go and help you. We're going to supply the forces that is needed for you to become king again, to kick out Heliodorus. Okay? And so that's how part of getting the whole of the kingdom by intrigue, that's part of his Antiochus IV's plan, That's part of how he's sweeping away the overflowing flood. Whatever the presents were, the obstacles were swept away, and Antiochus IV is now in charge. So he took care of that. And part of it too is he's going to sweep away the Prince of the Covenant. We'll get into that in a moment. So, although Antiochus IV initially he co-regent with his nephew, the boy, the young child, the child king, but 5 years later, after this co-regent, Antiochus IV kills him. Okay, so he's treacherous. He doesn't really want to share in power. He just kills him. And what evidence do we have that he killed him? Because this is so sparse in terms of data, is we have two. There's this British Museum artifact, and then there's a historian, Diodorus. So this tablet, cuneiform tablet, what's neat about this tablet, and back in that day, there are many tablets that were written that were like documenting, here are the lists of all the kings. And they would just write these down on these tablets, and that's how they would keep it as their records. So they have this tablet. So it's very precise. They would say in the year 137, however they use their calendar, and it is this 10th month, and they document that Seleucus IV died, and then Antiochus IV, his son, ascended to the throne. And as we try to figure all this out, there are sometimes some errors because of they don't keep track of all the names of the Antiochuses and the Seleucus and the Ptolemies, so that when you write it, it's like, well, which one were they talking about? So there could be some errors, and this is what some of the historians and people that are experts in this found. So there seemed to be a major error. So basically, the corrected version is that it's not Antiochus' son, but it's Antiochus Seleucus IV's son. So there's just some little errors that were there. So this is the first one. The first year, 137, Seleucus IV dies. And then the same year, now they're co-reigning, the young boy and Antiochus IV. And it's his adopted son, because how they treat it is like they think that Antiochus IV kind of took him in as being adopted to kind of help him along. And then later is when Antiochus, the young boy, is killed, and this is 5 years later, and this is very consistent with what was before. So finally, from 137, when Seleucus IV dies, to 143, 6 years later, 5 to 6 years later, now he's the sole king. So this is kind of how it worked out, as this information said. And the historian says the same thing, and he wrote around 60 to 30 BC, so he's pretty recent, within like around couple hundred years of this activity. So he says that Andronicus is the one that was put to death, and so there's just a lot of history here. I don't want to bore you with this. There's so much history I had to try to dig through. But the end of the day is that you got Heliodorus fled, the boy Antiochus is killed, Demetrius is still in jail. He'll end up to be king later. It's interesting. After Antiochus IV dies, he actually finally somehow gets out of jail, or that commitment's over. And this is the coin of Antiochus Epiphanes. So he gets this kingdom by intrigue, and then also he seizes the kingdom by flatteries. There's some translations that say flatteries, and what happened is some of the flatteries he would do is on his way back from Athens, talked a little bit about how he courted the king of Pergamus and his brother to help him. So that's one of the flatteries, to help them usurp, to kick out the usurper Heliodorus. He flattered the Syrians, showed them clemency. And so there's just a lot of things that he did. He sent ambassadors to Rome, paid tribute. So he was trying to really position himself by having all these political favors to position himself to really eventually take over Egypt. He really wants to kind of expand beyond just the Seleucid Empire area. And he's always had Egypt in his mind of trying to win it over. And that's part of his downfall. So here we go to verse 22, a flood of forces will be swept away. And some of the translations that use armed forces as it would be suggest military action, but he really didn't fight. It turned out that he was done more by clever negotiations, by words, by flatteries, by really at times empty promises even to gain favor, to gain position. So anyway, whatever these opposing forces were there, whether they're within or without Seleucia, they fell before him. And what gets interesting is that really this includes the high priest, and this is where it's really relevant to the Jews. Okay. So when it says that flood of force will be swept away, okay, so Antiochus IV is king, kicked out Heliodorus and any of the opposing forces, but not only will they be broken, but the covenant prince will be broken. Well, how does he break the covenant prince? Well, it turns out the covenant prince is the high priest, and the high priest at the time is called Ananias III, and he was very much very pro the Mosaic covenant and so forth. So he was actually a descendant of Aaron, so he was a rightful high priest. Okay, so through Jerusalem, through their law, he is along that line, he is the rightful high priest. And then the second bullet here is where usually it's by hereditary, that you need to be along the priestly lineage. Well, the Seleucid king, he's the one that determines who the high priest is, not according to the order of what the Bible says and what the Jews followed. So with that, he is the one that is like, oh, I'm Antiochus IV, the king. I came to the throne here, and he's now selling the high priest, the position, to the highest bidder, instead of belonging to the line of Aaron. Okay? So, when he came to the throne, Ananias' brother Jason, actually his name is Joshua, but he took on a Greek name, Jason. More on that in a moment. And he bribed the king to become high priest. So this is where Antiochus says, okay, you're the higher bidder, I'm going to appoint you high priest, and then he kicks out Ananias. So now Jason is the high priest. And Jason introduced Hellenistic institutions to Jerusalem. A move that was apparently rather popular at the time, though later condemned by the strongest terms by the writers of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So what's happening is, as Judea, Jerusalem area is being influenced by a lot of Hellenistic principles and ideas and so forth, well, a group of them will say, hey, I think it's more cool and hip to be Hellenistic than be old-fashioned like the Jews. So there's a group, kind of a split, to where there's a group that says, hey, I'd rather be with doing Hellenistic things instead of doing Jewish things. So there's a split here, and probably when I get to the Maccabees area, I will reintroduce this fact, because this is the beginning of when you have the Pharisees starting that are more like Ananias, that want to follow the Mosaic covenant and so forth. But then you have another group that is not. Okay, so this is now the kind of the sprinkling, the seedling of that thinking. So Jason says, well, I want to, since, Antiochus, you want to make this place great and you want to be great, well, I'm going to bring in all sorts of Hellenistic things into the city to make it great in the eyes of the world. This is where he builds a gymnasium and other things, okay? So what's going on is, in 175, the high priest was Ananias III, but then Jason, or Joshua is his Jewish name, a brother of Ananias, he actually gave more money in a bid to be in the high priest position. So he says, okay, Antiochus, I'll give you 27,000 pounds of silver for this position, and I'll give you 6,000 pounds more later. Okay, I don't know how he gets that, but so he's backed by this pro-Seleucid family, Tobiad. So Jason does that, and then what does he do? The king gave him approval, so Jason took the office, and he started changing the people of Jerusalem to the Greek way of life. So this is where that influence really just wreaked havoc, really, with the people. Okay, so Jason did away with Jewish customs, introduced new customs, that were contrary to the law. He built a stadium and other things. So, well, that's his 175, 174 range, and then a couple years later, guess what happened? Another person, Menelaus, offered the king even more money for high priest. Okay, and this guy, he's actually not a Greek. I mean, he's a Greek, he's not a Jew. So, what is this signal? When Antiochus IV accepts his bid as the high priest, this ends the Aaron line of priests. This literally officially ends the priesthood as per God. Okay, so once Jason, because he's still a Jew, he's still a brother of Ananias who is from the Aaron line, so he's still in that line, but once Menelaus becomes the high priest, now the high priest position is profaned. It's not right. Okay, so this is where it is broken. Okay. So 2 Maccabees chapter 4 records this, and so Jason sent Menelaus, who's a brother of Simon, that's just another person there, and when he stood before the king, that's Menelaus, he impressed him with his show of authority, and he offered 22,500 pounds of silver for this position. So he's giving like more money to buy this position. All right. So verse 25 says that Menelaus returned to Jerusalem with the papers from the king, showing that, confirmed that he's the high priest. He didn't possess any qualifications. Okay, it's just that he was rich and he was able to just buy this position. So Jason, who cheated his own brother out of the office, and now has to force to flee because now Menelaus is high priest, so Jason has to leave. So this is just, it's nuts. I had another slide with a bunch of stuff that I didn't include, but even Menelaus backtracked on his offer. There's a whole history of this, so there's just a bunch of very scandalous activity going on. So, here, verse 23, when it says an alliance is made with him, so Antiochus made an alliance with him, the high priest, right? But then he acted deceitfully. So, I'll sell you this, but Jason, but somebody else gave me a higher bid, so Jason, your bid's no good, right? So, basically, this verse kind of encapsulates, it's just a bunch of shady deals that this guy's making, okay? He just shady deals he made with Jason and with Eminence of Pergamum, which he didn't really give him back the favors that he promised by him helping him win back his kingship. He didn't actually fulfill his promise, and others. So I like the last bullet. Bluntly put, Antiochus IV was a wheeler-dealer who came to power from disadvantaged positions and with limited resources. So with the limited resources, he rose to power with a very small nation. He didn't have much of a following. He didn't have much of an army. But he was able to wheel and deal and get to where he is and rise in power. That's what's going on here. And now I want to get to a little bit of his actions. Verse 24. And I'm going to tackle the first portion of it. So during a time of peace, this is the Christian Standard Bible. I put the English Standard Version because there's some other explanations that help kind of give us a better flavor, a fuller look at this. So during a time of peace, ESV says without warning, so this is just some unexpected time. And what does he do? Antiochus IV, he just walks around, comes to the richest parts of the province. So he leaves his court or his building where he rules, and he just goes around to the different province. Okay? And kind of unusual, but that's what he did. And what did he do? He did something that his father's predecessors or father's father never did. What did he do that his previous kings never did? What he did was he lavished plunder, loot, and wealth, or goods, onto his followers. So he goes out of his, palace, goes through different parts of the richest part of the province. He starts just giving away money to whoever that will follow him. Okay? It's like, wow, this is so unusual. So was he crazy? It's a time of peace without warning. He does these unusual things. So thankfully, we have these two historians. Polybius is probably one of the most quoted historians. If you want to look up some of his work, he lived in 200 to 118 BC, so very close to when these activities happened, and Levi as well. So what does Polybius say? So Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, gained the name Epimanes, madman, by his conduct. Okay? So Polybius tells us of him escaping from his attendance at court. So he would escape out of his palace, right? Out of his court. He would often seen wandering about in all parts of the city with one or two companions. Okay? He was chiefly found at silversmiths and goldsmiths' workshops, holding forth at length and discussing technical matters with how to mold things and other craftsmen. So he just wanted to shop with people, okay? He used to also condescend to converse with any common people he met, and used to drink in the company of the meanest foreign visitors to Antioch. So just kind of unusual, not really fitting for a king, right? And then whenever he heard any of the young men that were at an entertainment, he would come in quite unceremoniously with a fife and procession of musicians, so that most of the guests got up and left in astonishment. It's like, he wants to take over the gig, right? It's just really strange. He would frequently put off his royal robes, assume a white toga, go around the marketplace like a candidate. So he's dressing down, so he would take some people by the hand, embracing them and begging them to vote for me. It's like, you're king, what are you doing, right? What are you even acting like this? So anyway, and then some more, he would sit up on an ivory chair like a Roman custom do, and he would try to listen to lawsuits. And it's just so odd what he's doing. The second bullet, this is where these gifts are, lavish gifts are so unusual. To some people, he used to give, what are gazelle's knuckle bones? I guess that's a rare thing. Give to others some dates, to others some money. And he would address people he had never seen before. And give them most unexpected kinds of presents. So this is why he's so crazy, just doing these things, just throwing gifts and things at them. I don't know why. And then he would also furnish these cities with really big honors to the gods. So we'll read more of that a little bit later from Levi. Okay. So this part really aligns well because this is where he's lavishing plunder, loot, and wealth to these followers, as it says in verse 24, just doing all these, I'll call crazy things. And then this one, he used to bathe in public baths. That's kind of unusual, right? They're full of common people, and he would have jars of these really precious ointments with him. So one occasion somebody says, how lucky you are, you kings, that you have such sense of smell so sweet. So this is something that is sought after. So what does he do? He doesn't answer anything at the time, but the next day, when that man is having a bath, he came in with this big jar and just pours it all over. So these people are like, wow, this is so precious and valuable. So they start like jump in and roll over themselves in it. So this is kind of the scene that he wants to like create and stuff. This is just, yeah, crazy, right? Anyway, Levi, I got a couple slides on him, from him. So he also says that Antiochus would sit on the ivory chair in Roman fashion, and he would administer justice on the most trifling matters. So it's like, why are you're the king and you're dealing with this kind of stuff? And yeah, so he just acted so unpredictably. I'll let you guys read more of it. I'll send these slides out. So it's the last bullet. So he seemed to some not knowing what he wanted because he's doing these crazy things. And some said he's playing childish tricks. I can see that. And some said he's just unquestionably insane. That's probably kind of a true assessment. One thing he did do is that he did pay respect to the temples and the gods in a way where he gave like really expensive stuff. He upgraded the temple of Jupiter, Olympus, and created magnificent theater of marble. So again, I'll let you read these on your own. And he shows splendor, surpassed all the other kings. So this is where it supports that verse where he just gave all these things in abundance. And if you think about the timing, why could he do that? Why could he give away all this? It's because, remember those 12,000 talents they had to give to Rome? I mean, for I think 12 years, well, that 12 years is up. He doesn't have to give that anymore. So now he can start collecting and he doesn't have to pay that war debt. So he's got more at his disposal. So verse 24, indeed, he did some very unusual things. He did things that none of his fathers and forefathers did. He lavished all this stuff, okay? And then to finish off verse 24, he did make plans against fortified cities. And why is he doing this? Because as his generosity was given out, he fixed the provinces near that area of in between where Seleucid Empire and the Egyptian Empire kind of meet, that middle area where Judea is. It was like there's this conflict to where who owns that land, because it's right in the middle, okay? And some say that this should be the king of Egypt's land, probably because of the last battle. So the first bullet says that some claim that this rightfully belonged to the king of Egypt. And Antiochus rejected this claim, and as such, he started fortifying cities nearby to get ready to take on Egypt. So this is why he's saying he's making plans against fortified cities. So roughly it's like 10 years of he's getting ready, that he wants, again, Egypt is on his mind. He wants to win over Egypt. So that's what he's preparing for. Now, I'm going to briefly go over this section just to give you the kind of the background, and time doesn't permit for me to really get into what the full event is, and then I will do this next time, but there's a lot of backstory here. And this part where it says Antiochus IV's rivalry with Egypt, and you look at this passage and you're like, okay, you got with a large army, okay, he is Antiochus IV, will stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south. That's Ptolemy VI. So now, this passage is saying king of the north is going to fight against king of the south. Okay? So, the king of the south, Ptolemy VI, will prepare battle with an extreme large and powerful army, but he will not succeed. Okay. Why does he not succeed? Plots will be made against him. So what happened? Who is undermining Ptolemy VI from succeeding? Right? So verse 26 tells us who. Those who eat his provisions will destroy him. His army will be swept away and many will fall slain. So those who eat his provisions is those who eat at his table. Somehow, what do you call it, bulls? So, some people that are with Ptolemy VI are eating at the king's table are the ones that are undermining him. That's what's going on. Now, verse 27 is really strange. So, Ptolemy VI loses, right, because of this undermining. But then verse 27 says, the two kings, that's Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI, the two kings whose heart are bent on evil, so their mind is evil, right? They will speak lies at the same table. Wait a minute, the two kings are sitting at the same table? How does that happen? You gotta wonder, like, what is going on here? So, they speak lies at the same table. Basically what they're doing is they're speaking lies to each other. So they say one thing to each other, but their mind is something else. Okay? But to no avail, for the end, still the end will come at the appointed time. And then verse 28 says, the king of the north, Antiochus IV, will return back to his land with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action and then return to his own land. So he will fight against some of the Jews and some of the people that are against. Well, he will fight and then let go and then come and then go back home. Verse 29 will continue on that he will fight. So just to try to understand these verses, what is the relationship between Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI that's giving this very convoluted situation where they're sitting together at the same table? Aren't they enemies, right? So for the rest of the time, I'm going to show you a bunch of connections. All right, so these are family trees, and these family trees, I hope, will help us understand what is the relationship of Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI. So we start with Ptolemy I. He married Berenice I. We got Ptolemy II, and then third and fourth. And The color code is what's in blue are the rulers. And these are the other siblings that came. And the purple line, horizontal line, are the marriages. Okay? So now you got up to Ptolemy the Fourth. Apparently it's kind of common for Egyptian brothers and sisters to get married. Okay? In the kingship. This is, but it happens. Apparently this nation is like, I think the only one that really does this, that people can research, find out. So Ptolemy the Fourth married his sister, and they had a child, Ptolemy the Fifth. And then his son Antiochus the First becomes king. They have 5 children. Antiochus the Second becomes king, marries Laodice, then had to divorce her to accept Berenice, and then accepted her back, things like that. And then they have a son named Seleucus the Second who becomes king. Okay. So I want to just highlight some other things on the block out a few parts of the previous slide. So one of the sons of Seleucus the First had 5 children. And one of those 5 children is Laodice the Second, who marries Seleucus the Second. Okay, so it's like so Ptolemy the Fourth, number 1, this is the chronology. Then Ptolemy the Second, Ptolemy the Fifth is the second ruler after Ptolemy the Fourth dies. Now when Ptolemy the Fifth dies, remember Ptolemy the Sixth was a really young boy. Remember the Rosetta Stone, right? So what happened? Ptolemy the Sixth, being like 6 years old, he's the king, but really his mother was co-ruling with him. So Cleopatra the First really was ruling, calling the shots, really, until he was of age. Okay? So Cleopatra, on her deathbed, appoints these 2 counselors to be the king, and Ptolemy the Sixth is still the so-called figurehead, but these 2 are the ones that are really ruling the kingdom. Okay. And then, as we'll find out in these verses in Daniel verses 25 to 28, Ptolemy the Sixth loses out against Antiochus. So what happened? His brother and sister becomes kings of Egypt. So Ptolemy the Eighth and Cleopatra the Second are co-regents of Egypt, while Ptolemy the Sixth is being basically, let's say, captured by Antiochus. Okay. After all that, Ptolemy the Sixth becomes ruler again. Then we have Ptolemy the Seventh. He rules for like 1 year. And then Ptolemy the Eighth becomes ruler again. And then Cleopatra the Third becomes ruler. All right. No, I guess I can give you guys a quiz next time. Oh my gosh. This is just so crazy, but it's like, this is like, and I have a spreadsheet that somebody made of all the co-regents and regents of Egypt for like the couple hundred years, and it gives it by month and year. Who did that? What is this crazy spreadsheet? It's like, how do you keep track of all that? And how do the people keep track of it, right? So, now, one last slide. And as you think about this, to give you the background, well, here is the relationship. Okay, so back before you got all this, but the relationship is Cleopatra the First and Antiochus the Fourth, their siblings. Okay. Remember, Antiochus the Third gave Cleopatra to marry Ptolemy the Fifth. So Cleopatra and Antiochus IV are siblings. Okay. So what does Ptolemy VI call Antiochus IV? What? Uncle, right? Right? So that's their uncle. So this is really complicated because when Antiochus IV was reigning in his realm, he was very content and he was growing and he was having a big empire. Well, and then as Ptolemy VI, I think, became of age to be king, and it was the coronation. So Antiochus IV sends some people as to represent him at this coronation. And then he hears about a lot of things, and it got really complicated. And so this is where the verses 25 to 28 talks about some of this conflict, but it's so abbreviated that you have to really understand how that all played out. And let's see, do I have one more? Yeah, okay. So what's going on, I showed this before, this is what the Sixth Syrian War is all about, is how did all this come to play? How did Antiochus IV really defeated Ptolemy VI, which then made Egypt goes, well, now we have to make Ptolemy VI's siblings to be king and queen to rule Egypt. So there's a lot of battles going on within all this, and it's something that I didn't want to start and stop in a bit, so I want to do it in one fell swoop, all right? And so if you think about this, okay, now this is the last slide, all right? So you think about this, so verses 25 to 28 is a big chunk of the Sixth Syrian War. And then verse 29 is really key, because after all this battle, after the king of the north, that's Antiochus IV, in verse 28, he returns to his land with great wealth. And then verse 29, he says he comes back down to the south again because he wants Egypt again. It's still on his mind. But what happened? This time will not be like the first. So what it's saying, he's going to come back down to Egypt. It's not going to be like the first, where you're not going to win. Okay? You're not going to win. And verse 30 says the ships of Kittim, that's kind of another way of saying this is the Roman forces, will come against Antiochus IV, and he will be intimidated and he will withdraw. Okay? And this withdrawal is so intimidating and humiliating to Antiochus IV that he will just be in a rage. This is where it says, I kind of graded out because it's the second half, verse 30, he will rage against the Holy Covenant and take action. So this humiliation is of such degree that when he had to basically leave because he can't beat the Romans, he goes back, and this is where he begins the assault on the Jews, and then comes the abomination of desolation. Okay? And so, because I'm not going to be teaching for a number of weeks, if you want to research this moment in history in verse 30 about him being intimidated is very famous. It's very famous, where this Roman comes, and he's not even a soldier general type. He's just dressing in like normal, probably like Senate type clothing. So he comes, and then Antiochus IV is in his soldier outfit, and they want to talk to hopefully negotiate or something. So what does this Roman person do? He goes, well, you're encroaching on this land, and I want you to leave. Right? So Antiochus IV goes, well, let me have a day or two to think about it. Right? So what does this Roman person do? He has a branch in his hand, and he goes, draws a circle around Antiochus IV, and he goes, I want you to give me a decision before you leave the circle. This is a very famous scene. So this is where the phrase, you draw a line in the sand, comes from. This is it. So Antiochus IV, in that moment, had to decide. And then he thought about it, and he cannot beat the Romans, he has to leave. And he was so humiliated by that. This is where he goes on his rage against the Jews. Okay? You guys can read up on that, and I won't fill in the names, you guys can just look it up. But that is a historic type event that really defined really the rest of Antiochus' short life after that. He had to leave in humiliation, and then he goes berserk on that side, and then really at that point, Rome is starting to take over Egypt, and then eventually they'll start to take over also Judea. So this is within 100 years they'll take over Egypt and also Judea. Okay. All right. A lot of stuff again. I figured this was a good stopping point to kind of give you the background of this, and we'll dig into the Sixth Syrian War and what that means. But basically, as you think about all this, these are like big moments in history, not only from the Egyptian Empire's point of view, but also the Seleucid Empire's point of view, and from the Jews' point of view. Because now you've broken the high priest line. Now you're going to have the abomination of desolation, and it's no wonder that after that happens, verse 36 starts going right to the end times, because that's the next important thing for the Jews. Everything else is kind of, part of the world continue going on. Okay? All right? All right, good. Well, let me close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word, and this passage in Daniel records that you're the God of history, as you've laid out in very concise terms as to how it's playing out, how it did play out, and it's amazing the prophecies in your word. And God, may we just rest assured that you indeed are sovereign, and you will work out all things for the good of those who love you. And we just thank you that we can rest in that. Please bless the rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen.